So this week we're going to work with text files. Um, all files are binary files, whatever you have stored in them. But we differentiate file types based on how the binary data is encoded. Say a PDF, a JPEG, Excel, etc. One of the basic file types is a text file. The data file can be formatted, the data in the file can be formatted or unformatted. Think of a text file that contains a book. In most instances, text is not formatted, but all runs together just using the regular punctuation to format the text. So the periods, the commas, the exclamation points, that's what separates the text as we read it. But the text is just one long string of text that's stored. We can also have formatted text files. And think of these more like a database. And what we do is we have a row of data, and then at the end of each data is ended with a carriage return. Um, and so we can have rows of data that correspond to records if you had a database. The columns of the data or data fields in data can be separated by some punctuation mark. In most cases, it could be a comma. And if you do that, if you separate the pieces of data in each row, it's called a delimited file. This allows, say, the same column of data to have different sizes. So if we had a column of data called name, we could have a 4-letter name, a 12-letter name, and with the comma delimited, it would all be able to be fit without a problem. The other type of data file is a formatted one, and this one adds spaces to pad it out. And so what we do is we say we're going to have a name, and we say 20 spaces for the first name. And so if we say FRED for the first 4, the next 16 are all spaces. So then the next column of data, say last name, always starts on the same column or space from the edge of the data file. And so this data file is square, and so we call this a fixed width data file. The fixed width data file is larger because of all those extra spaces we've had to add in to pad out the data. And so it takes longer to send over the network and takes more disk space to save. On the other hand, it's much quicker to read into memory, and it takes much less processing power to do that. You would think with today's fast networks and cheap disk space that we would use the fixed width files the most. But in fact, the most common file are delimited files. And in fact, the most common delimiter used is a comma. And in fact, it's so common that there's a special extension for it called a CSV file, which is common separated values, but it's a comma delimited files. Text files like this, either comma delimited or fixed width, are used to move data between systems or between databases. It's also used in the modern world when you have some sort of measurement device, say temperature readings. The data that comes out of that will be stored in a comma delimited file. And so Python, one of the reasons that Python is so popular today is it reads in the data files really, really well. In fact, we can read an entire text file right into a single string variable. It doesn't. You can read an entire novel into a string variable, and it doesn't care. It's very happy to do that. Now, when we take this data and we put it in a text file, either comma delimited text file or a fixed width file, we lose all the metadata, all the information about that data. So we would say Fred, Wilma, Barney, but we wouldn't have that information that says first name, last name, address. All we would have would be the data. So if we want to encode that, keep that metadata or encode it with the data, we can use a different text file data format. And two of the very common ones are JSON, JSON, or XML. Both are similar in that they wrap the data in metadata tags. If you've ever seen HTML tags, you have a beginning and an end. Similar to that, they're slightly different formats, but they're very similar. I'll include a link to the W3 schools that will give you more information about them. For our purpose, the big difference between JSON and XML is we can include lists in JSON files, and we can't do that in XML. So for our purposes, since we have arrays or lists, which aren't arrays, but we're going to pretend they're arrays for JSON. We're going to talk about JSON files and not talk about XML files. And that's what we're going to be spending this week on, is talking about text files.